The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Charles Michel, President of the European Council of the European Union. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Charles Michel, President of the European Council of the European Union, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, Nadia Murad was born in Iraq. Nadia Murad is a Yazidi. On the 15th of August 2014, her life was appended. Jihadists attacked her village. 6 of her brothers were murdered before her very eyes, and she saw her mother at that time for the last time. She was captured to become a sexual slave, and she endured the basest atrocities, and she ultimately escaped. Today, Nadia Murad is a Nobel Peace Laureate, and she is fighting indefatigably for the rights and dignity of women. I wish to take this opportunity from here to quote her. I quote, "Today, we have seen the price of conflict marked on women's bodies in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in the Tigris, and in many other areas. So much potential has been lost, but if we disregard the power of women in conflict prevention and rebuilding communities." End of quote. Ladies and gentlemen, I met with Nadia Murad, and I saw in her eyes all of the strength of humanity. I heard in the softness of her voice utter determination. She decided to draw from the tragedy, and she drew from this tragedy an unshakable strength to transform the world, And it is thus inspired by Madam Murad, that I address you today. Ladies and gentlemen.
The European Union was forged by Europeans, like an irrepressible surge of dignity and freedom after 2 bloody world wars. Today, we face another turning point in human history because we are entrenched in another war, a global war. And this global war has no opposing sides, no armies, no land is lost or conquered. Yet, this war destroys lives, brings countries to their knees, and unimaginable suffering to families. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about the war that we humans have waged against nature. We have tortured our planet, abused our natural resources. We have committed acts of war against our environment. And now, nature is fighting back, bringing us back to our senses, back to humility. No one can say, "I didn't know." For decades, scientists have sounded the alarm, but their warnings fell on deaf ears. We turned away so as not to see. And today, the shock is brutal. We are reaping what we have sown. The fires that have devastated Australia, the droughts that have ravished Africa, the floods that have scarred Europe, and the hurricanes that have battered the United States. There is another scourge that has afflicted our planet for nearly 2 years. This also predicted by science, COVID-19. It has killed 4.7 million people and shattered the lives of billions more. But this pandemic has also led us back to the essential, life and human dignity. And to safeguard these, we have taken exceptional measures, massive confinements that have brought our economies, our social lives, and more seriously, our freedoms to a near standstill. This pandemic has opened our eyes to the obvious. Our lives and our health are inextricably linked to the health of our fields, forests, oceans, and fauna. We share our planet with other living beings, and it's time. It's time to stop waging war against nature. It's time for humans to sign an armistice with nature, a peace treaty with our planet for the generations to come. It's time for us to transform the world, just as the previous generation did after the last World War. Inspired by the visionary signatories of the United Nations Charter, it's time to get back to basics, reason, and good judgment. Inspired by these principles, they left us an international order based on rules to promote peace. They built liberal democracies to guarantee the dignity of each individual. They championed the development model based on the freedom to trade and to pursue economic opportunity to ensure prosperity. And these choices have ushered in progress and greater stability. But the world of yesterday is not that of today, and even less the world of tomorrow. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, brutal unilateralism too often elbows out multilateralism. The ambition to dominate creates new dependencies and leads to tensions and conflicts. Democracies are under pressure, both from within and from without. Authoritarian regimes, openly or not, meticulously undermine the principles of freedom at home and even beyond their borders. And finally, our model of economic development has run its course. Its flaws are increasingly visible: the extreme exploitation of resources and increasing inequality. We must escape this vicious circle. Excellencies, ladies, gentlemen, we are indeed at an inflection point, and we must ask ourselves, what world do we want for tomorrow? We want a world inspired by wisdom, a world that trusts in science, that guarantees the dignity and freedom of every human being. We want a fairer and a safer world. We want cooperation rather than confrontation, solidarity rather than isolation, transparency, not secrecy. And we want loyalty, honoring our word when our word is given. Mesdames et messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen, you can count on the European Union by supporting Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, and fully in line with the Secretary General, Mr. Guterres. A fairer world is a world where we are all protected against COVID-19. The European Union has sought to provide massive support for research, and we have developed tremendous capacities for vaccine production. We have exported 700 million doses to 130 countries, and 3 billion euros have been invested in COVAX. It is important for us to acknowledge the fact that there is a gulf in vaccination between developing countries. This is not acceptable. There's a need for us to act more. We have launched tangible projects. 1 billion euros were mobilized to develop the pharmaceutical production capacities, including vaccine capacities in a number of African countries. And we also stand ready to support partnerships in Latin America. And we are aware of the fact that vanquishing this pandemic is not enough. There's a need to prevent next pandemics, and there's a need to shore up global resilience to them. There's a need to that end. With Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, we have proposed an international treaty on pandemics, and we call upon all to support the launch of negotiations to that end. A fairer, more secure world is a world free of the climate threat. There's a need for us to have ambitious, far-reaching goals. The Paris Agreement was a milestone, and the European Union was a consequential actor in this. Contrary to others, we have honored our commitment to defend this agreement, and the 27 heads of government 2 years ago paved the way by adopting the commitment of climate neutrality by 2050 for the European Union. Others are following this example, and in the same spirit, the European Union has decided to raise its goals by 2030. Of course, there's a need for us to continue to make headway in international cooperation to move towards a carbon tax. At our level, we have an ETS, emissions exchange system. This is an approach which we believe stimulates innovation and generates results. There's an overriding need to further build investments in greening the economy, and we wish to be in a position to build global approaches to establish a regulatory framework for green financing. We are aware that not all are equal in the race against time vis-a-vis global warming. Industrialized countries shoulder particular responsibility in supporting developing countries. And since the pledge in 2019 and 2020 to mobilize $100 billion additional to finance the international fight against global warming, since then, few have honored their word. From 2013 to 2019, the EU and member states have disbursed 127 billion euros. That is 1/3 of the total, and the commitment, and we call upon other partners to honor their pledges as well. It is a question of trust and a question of equality. Ladies and gentlemen, a fairer world, a safer and more secure world is also a world in peace. At this very moment, women are brutalized. They're being raped because they are women. And this weapon of war is used, particularly in the Horn of Africa, in Ethiopia. We call for a ceasefire and an immediate end to ethnic violence. Access to humanitarian assistance needs to be provided without any obstacles. Poverty and radicalism are two scourges which feed off one another. Education, basic services, health infrastructure are, as we know, the best solutions to address the related instability. In the Sahel, the European Union and 9 of our member states have mobilized. We are standing alongside with populations for security and defense and for development assistance, and of course, the restoration of institutions of state governance and ensuring good governance are of vital importance to achieve lasting results. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, the new situation in Afghanistan is a failure for the international community, and there's a need for lessons to be drawn from this. However, one thing is certain: the end of military operations is not the end of the European commitment to Afghan men and women. We wish to avoid any humanitarian disaster and to the greatest possible extent to safeguard the gains made in the past 2 decades, specifically for women and girls. In the Indo-Pacific region, the European Union is the leading investor and one of the most important trade partners. 40% of our trade transits there, and we have decided to massively strengthen and shore up our cooperation. This is the thrust of the now strategic partnership between us and ASEAN. Freedom of navigation and security in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean need to be guaranteed. In line with international law, the European Union stands ready to fully shoulder its responsibility in that regard. Ladies and gentlemen, never will the European Union turn a blind eye to violations of human rights. Rule of law, non-discrimination, respect for minorities, including LGBTQI, are fundamental values. This is the thrust of the human rights dialogue which we have been engaged in with many states throughout the world. We fully uphold these values, but we also stand ready to remain committed and to engage in dialogue in order to surmount global challenges related to climate, biodiversity, and the fight against pandemics. Peace is far more than the absence of war. Peace is never guaranteed. Peace is worked at every day. Peace is nourished by interconnections among our societies. The more interests we share, the less we engage in conflict. Economic, scientific, cultural, intellectual exchanges are the bedrock for stability, and this hinges on regional or continental integration projects. This also hinges on wide-ranging partnerships among our integrated spaces, be this Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia, and also Africa. With our African brethren, we are working assiduously for a new alliance with the African continent, through listening, through mutual respect, by taking into account the specificities, realities, transparency and good governance needs to be the hallmark for all parties. We are mobilizing in private sectors to invest in both infrastructure and new technology, so we support all efforts to promote education. This is because education is the surest way to provide for a better future. Our shared interests are an engine to ensure a successful new partnership. Ladies and gentlemen, we, the European Union and member states, are one of the leading economic powers in the world, and we are also a leading sponsor of peace and sustainable development. We are financing with member states 1/4 of the regular budget of the United Nations, 30% of the overall budget for peacekeeping, and half of global development assistance. This is a deliberate choice. This is a choice which aligns with our vision of an open and interconnected world. We have values to promote, citizens to promote, to protect, and interests to defend. And in this spirit, we're developing the strategic autonomy of the European Union, including in our capacities of security and defense, to be less dependent, to shore up our positive influence, and also to strengthen our Atlantic Alliance. This is an alliance which is anchored in our democratic values, and it is a staunch pillar of our security and stability in the world. Stronger allies make for a stronger alliance in transparency and loyalty. Our positive influence is something which you have also seen strengthened in our immediate neighborhood. This is the thrust of the Eastern Partnership, which is a long-term commitment with Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. This is also the thrust of our support for the Belarusian population and our strong stance vis-a-vis the Lukashenko regime, specifically when he attempts to exploit migrants as a hybrid weapon to destabilize members of the European Union. And lastly, this is the thrust and the focus of the efforts that we have been engaged in order to strengthen ties with Western Balkans countries. The recent uptick in violence in the Middle East was a fresh reminder of the overriding need to resume peaceful dialogue towards a two-state solution with Israel and Palestine. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues, transforming the world, making it fairer, more secure, guaranteeing the dignity for every person. That is the promise. That is the pledge of the United Nations. And it is incumbent upon all of us to meet this promise, to honor the commitment, to rise to the ambition for all the Nadia Murads of the world and for succeeding generations. You can count on the European Union. Thank you.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the European Council of the European Union for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.